Hi, everyone. Thanks for checking out this edition of the Safe Travels Podcast. My name is Joey. We are in the land of enchantment in New Mexico at Carlsbad Caverns National Park, and I had the opportunity to sit down with Park Ranger Tiffany Rugger. And in this episode, we talk all about this amazing national park, from geology to bats and general park information. Tiffany, we are in beautiful New Mexico, the land of enchantment, and we are at Carlsbad Caverns National Park. And first, I want to start with you and your journey to this incredible cave.
I got a degree in geology, and then after that, I started working in outdoor education. Never thought I would work outdoors, because that's where all the bugs are. I'm not a fan of bugs. And then eventually moved from outdoor education to interpretive ranger in Catoctin Mountain Park as a seasonal. And then I moved out here as an interpretive ranger as well. And then eventually moved into PSAR, Preventative Search and Rescue, which is where I am now.
And you're originally from Connecticut. You're a long ways away from home and a long ways away from the trees that you grew up with. What has made you fall in love with being here in New Mexico?
Well, as you said, New Mexico is the land of enchantment. However, we call it the land of entrapment because it's so beautiful you never want to leave. I do miss the trees, but there's a lot of wildlife on the surface, especially if you know where to look. And then there's a lot of caves. Every one of them is very unique and beautiful.
You mentioned your journey going from interpretive to PSAR. What has that journey been like for you, being mostly on the surface level, educating visitors, to now interacting with visitors in a different kind of way?
It's similar in some ways because you're still talking to people and trying to convince them of something. It's a different thing you're convincing them of. Sometimes you're trying to convince them, if you're an interpretive ranger, of how important the park is. And when you're a PSAR ranger, you're trying to convince them to wear shoes instead of flip-flops when they're going down the main corridor, or to bring water with them to protect themselves rather than to protect the park. So a lot of it is similar, but it's a lot more of a flexible job because you never know what each day is going to bring. Sometimes in interpretation, you're going to do a program that day or talk to visitors at the front desk. In PSAR, you could be talking to visitors all day, or you could be pulling someone out of a cave or off of a trail, or rescuing a dog. Who knows?
For those who are unfamiliar, PSAR is Preventative Search and Rescue, and you just kind of alluded to it, but not only are you communicating to the public outside of the caverns, are you also executing those search and rescue missions inside of the caverns?
Mm-hmm. So my job is to prevent search and rescues, and when I fail at that job, then I do have to go search and rescue. So my job is essentially to get myself out of a job. If we prevent all the search and rescues, then I won't have a job anymore, and that'll be great.
Well, let's jump into this incredible national park. I experienced the cave yesterday for the first time, my first ever cave, and I have to say I was absolutely blown away. It is whatever your expectations are prior to coming here, it will blow that out of the water. It's remarkable. Did you have the same experience when you got the job here and explored the cavern for the first time?
Yeah, I had been to caves, but it had been many years by the time I came here. I had been to Mammoth Cave, which is on the East Coast, and a few other caves. But when I came here, when I walked first through the natural entrance, and it just kept going down and down and down and down with all these beautiful formations, I was like, oh, I get to work here for however long I want. And it was one of the best feelings in the entire world.
I could only imagine. We are in the Chihuahuan Desert, a part of the Guadalupe Mountains range, and the Guadalupe Mountains National Park is right around the corner from here. And this area was formed largely because of the Capitan Reef. But can you dive into the geology on why exactly and how exactly the Carlsbad Caverns exists?
Yeah, so to start, you have to go back about 265 million years ago when this was all an inland sea. And something kind of like the Mediterranean, but closed off. There's no exit to the ocean. And then after that, the sea had a reef in it. And this was before corals, so don't think of a coral reef. Think of like sponges and algae, stuff like that. Eventually, the water dried up. The sea disappeared. The algae turned into rock, which is the limestone that you could see all around us. And then after about 50 million years ago, that area uplifted with tectonic plate movement, and small cracks formed in this area that you see around you. And then in those cracks, the interaction of petroleum, bacteria, the water table, and heat created sulfuric acid. And that sulfuric acid started carving out these gigantic chambers that are below us right now. If you go to a different cave, a lot of caves are formed by rivers, and that's carbonic acid, which is in most waters. It's also in your sodas. If you drink a soda or sparkling water, it's not really going to affect you too much. It might hurt your teeth a little bit, but you'll be fine. If you drink sulfuric acid, that's not what you want. It's the same stuff that's in your car battery, so it'll end very badly. So that sulfuric acid carved out these really big chambers really quickly that you see. It took about 8 to 6 million years to carve out those chambers, depending on which cave in the area you're in and which part of the cave you're in. And then after that, a lot of formations started forming. So that's 8 million years of dripping water, and that was formed by carbonic acid.
You mentioned sulfuric acid. I think one of the main differences between how this cave formed and other caves formed from water is the sulfuric acid rose, correct, and created the rooms from the ground up rather than the top down.
Yeah. So one of the cool things about the sulfuric acid caves, there's only about 5% of caves in the world are created by sulfuric acid, is that they don't need an entrance. So when you're walking around up here, you sometimes see a hole in the ground that is a cave. There's a really large one right over there. But there's also a lot of ones that could be underground that you never know because they don't open up to the surface. And over time, entrances will collapse and we'll be able to enter them. But there could be thousands more caves in these hills that we just don't know about.
Why was this the perfect environment for the sulfuric acid to rise and create these giant rooms?
So you need a few things. First, you need petroleum, and you need bacteria. The bacteria is going to eat the petroleum. And when you drove here, you may have noticed all the oil wells out there. It's because there's a lot of petroleum in this area. So we needed that. We needed the bacteria. We also needed the uplift to keep the water table going down because the bacteria was right on the water table interacting with petroleum as well. If we didn't have those three things, then we would not have the sulfuric acid caves.
It's fascinating. And taking a couple of steps back, if we were here 250 million years ago, we would be underwater right now, correct?
Possibly, yes. We are high because of the uplift of the area. The water would actually have been a little bit lower, but this mountain wouldn't be here. So yes, we would be swimming. Or you can get some beachfront property. You are a little bit too late for that, though.
You had mentioned a couple of the formations that you can see once you immediately start going into the cavern that is below us. What are some of the most popular formations that visitors can see once they start hiking down?
Well, there's the whale's mouth, which is one of my favorite ones. It looks like a whale's mouth. That's on the hike down. Another really popular one is the bashful elephant. It looks like an elephant that is facing away from you. Also kind of looks like a molar, but, bashful elephant sounds cooler, so we went with that. Way cooler. That is on the King's Palace tour, so you do need a ranger to go with you to see that. And then there's also the Rock of Ages, which has been one of the most famous formations since the 1930s. There was a time when all the tours in the cave were ranger guided. We can't do that anymore due to the amount of people who come. But they would turn off all the lights after everyone had sat down at the bottom of the Rock of Ages, and rangers would come in and sing the hymn Rock of Ages, which everyone at the time knew was a pretty popular song. And oftentimes the whole audience would be singing along. It would bring people to tears. It was a really big moment. After the National Park Service moved away from this sort of showy stuff that you see in a lot of the national parks, like feeding the bears at Yellowstone or putting a big hole in a tree in Sequoia to drive through, we moved away from that as well and went to more scientific endeavors.
We'll dive more into the scientific endeavors here in a second, but I do want to touch on the showy era of the National Park Service. I heard a story that it's still down there. There's a snack bar at the very bottom of the caverns, and they used to grill burgers and fried chicken down there, and there's still grease on the ceiling above the snack bar. Is that true?
Part of it. So the story of them actually cooking the food down there is not true.
Okay.
They did bring the food, so they'd cook it up here in one of the buildings that you now see that have been repurposed, and then they would carry it all the way down and give it to people. But the grease on the ceiling, yes, it did get up there, got everywhere. And then there was bacteria that grew from all the stuff that was left behind. In certain parts of the cave, you can see a lot of little chicken bones that have been left behind because people really like the fried chicken down there.
Wow, that is fascinating. Now when you go down in the caverns, it's clear how protected this area is. I mean, there's signs everywhere. There's PSAR rangers that are talking to people about how fragile and important this ecosystem is and how rare it is. We talk about the sulfuric acid, 5% of caves in the world only have that. But in previous, decades, were visitors allowed to take some of the fragments that they saw in the caverns, and has that caused, some setbacks in the caverns?
Yeah, so every 5 years, we count all the broken formations. We make an intern do it because it's really boring to count the formations. But if you go through the cave, you'll notice little dots on some of the formations, usually made with nail polish because it's the easiest way. We've also been experimenting with different types of markers. But it's a different color for every year. In 2023 to 2024, it takes about 4 months to count all the formations. So they started, I think, in November of 2023. They marked all the broken formations with red, and then in 2018, it was with green. And they counted about 17,000 broken formations in a 5-year period. So there are still people that are breaking the formations, sometimes accidentally, which is why on the King's Palace tour you can't take backpacks. You can take backpacks into the main part of the cave, but we ask that you be careful not to swing them around and break formations. And sometimes there are people who do break them on purpose. Please, obviously, don't do that. But in the earlier times, in the 1920s, when you'd get maybe 100 people a year, and it was really exciting for everyone to come, they would sometimes encourage you to take a formation. But once we became a national park, it's ended because protection of the national park, and you were no longer allowed to even touch the formations because of the damage you could do.
And there's even, in the big room tour, an area that displays dynamite blowing up a wall, which was an idea to eventually build an area for cars to drive through the big room.
Yeah, so luckily we had a Great Depression, and that stopped that idea. But yeah, there was this idea to blast a hole in the side of the mountain here. So if you come to the park, you'll notice that there's a big cliff on one side. The cave is pretty much down at the bottom of that cliff. So if you blasted a hole in the side of the cave, you would be able to just drive your car out into the valley. And so they did want to put a road to make it a driving tour, to make it really accessible. Had they done that, there would no longer be a cave here. It would have been destroyed. Even putting in the elevators caused an issue because it removed a lot of humidity from the cave. And we've recently put in airlocks. We just finished our last airlock about 2 weeks ago to keep the humidity down in the cave, along with the radon, because that was radioactive gas that's down there that was flooding the visitor center as well. And it wasn't affecting the visitors at all, but rangers who worked in the visitor center every day could get a little sick from that.
Jumping back into the science stuff here at this park, some phrases that you often hear: soda straws, stalagmites. What are some of the most popular terms and formations that you hear about and that you should learn about prior to coming here?
Well, the two basic ones are the stalagmites and the stalactites. So the stalagmites are the mighty mountains that grow on the ground. The stalactites are the ones that hang tight to the ceiling. We also have draperies, so those are the ones that kind of look like a curtain, and they're going to be nice and wavy. Those are formed, they're all formed from dripping water. So the stalagmites and stalactites are very simple. Water is dripping straight down, creating a pile on the ground, or a pile on the ceiling, or both, and then when they connect, it's a column. Draperies are a little bit different. You'll have a sloped ceiling, and if you've ever washed your hands and held your hands up like this, water will run down towards your elbow. If you don't dry your hands. It's the same concept as running along a sloped ceiling held on by surface tension, leaving behind a small trace of calcite. You also have soda straws, and those are interesting because it's a drip of water that's dripping in the exact same spot every time. And so you'll have the circle on the outside of that drip of water forming from calcite, and then that water drips. The next drop of water will go down, create another ring, and it'll create a hollow formation. Other formations we have in the cave are helictites, which we think those are formed by water pressure, but we're not entirely certain yet. And they'll kind of just go every which way. They look really ridiculous. And then we also have flowstone, which looks like it's really nice and soft rock. It's still just a rock. It's still pretty solid, but it's just caused by a water flowing over a surface and leaving behind calcite.
And how about sponge work that looks like Swiss cheese inside of the caverns?
So that's not actually a formation. That is the beginning of the cave. So if you see sponge work, it is an area where the sulfuric acid started carving out little holes. And so if the sulfuric acid had stayed there, all those holes would have connected and turned into a big cavern. And then luckily for us, so we can see it, there's not a lot of dripping water that has reached those areas and hasn't built formations over it.
And are these processes still occurring? Is groundwater still seeping down and creating these stalagmites and stalactites?
They are probably a little bit slower than they were a few million years ago. I don't know if you noticed, but we are in a desert, so not a lot of rain. We get about 10 inches on average because this is a wet desert, believe it or not. And so all of that will seep through the ground and eventually start dripping. It takes months to years for that water to get to the cave, depending on which part of the cave you're in. If you're closer to the surface, it takes less time. If you're 750 feet down, it's going to take a little longer. But that water is still dripping, and it's going to keep dripping as long as water keeps falling on the surface.
One of the things that I've absolutely fallen in love with about this park is, I mentioned earlier in the podcast that El Capitan, a part of Guadalupe Mountains, is around the corner. You can see El Capitan and recognize and marvel at its beauty, but sometimes geologic time is hard to process. And even in that instance, it's kind of hard to process because it's a mountain. We see mountains a lot. But here, when you see the stalagmites and the stalactites coming from the ceiling, it makes you feel like this had to be forming for forever. For a formation that is, because you can hear drips of water coming down from the ceiling, to see that and to hear how slow that drip is. This is one of the few parks that I've ever been to that makes you really feel like this had to take millions of years to form.
Yeah. And it's funny because you could have a formation that's, a couple of inches tall and it'll be millions of years old, and you'll have a formation that's a lot bigger than that. That could be a little less. It could be younger because of how fast that water is dripping. We have measured one area of the cave with really fast growing formations, and they grow about 1/4 of an inch per 100 years or so. So very small. And then you can imagine the formations that are wider. You have to take that 1/4 of an inch and use it like Legos, just create a nice circle, and it's going to take a lot longer for a formation to grow.
When you enter through the natural entrance, you can be in the cave for a couple of hours exploring. The big room alone can be over an hour walking around and exploring. What % of the caverns do you surmise we've even discovered?
Well, we have no idea what percentage of the cave has been discovered. We know that there's 40 miles so far, so that's a lot of cave. Visitors can walk about 3 miles of it if they do the King's Palace tour, as well as the main corridor and the big room. But those 40 miles, a lot of them are crawling on your stomach and pretty far away. We are fairly certain this cave connects to other caves in the area, so that would add length to the cave, but how much, we have no idea, because we haven't discovered it yet.
Is there research ongoing? Are there cavers in there trying to solve this?
So there were, in 2018 was the last exploration, and they added a not very long couple of 100 feet or so. They crawled through a very small hole, and they called themselves the Twisted Sisters because it was an all-female group. They had known this hole existed for quite a while, but it was so small that they needed to find really small people to go through, and you can't send children to an unknown area. It is illegal, unfortunately. But they found a bunch of women, because women tend to be smaller than men, and sent them through this tiny little hole. They had to breathe out to get through this hole, which is how small it was. And they found a couple of chambers on the other side. But they also found an area that had some very delicate formations, and they decided not to go past that and to explore further because they didn't want to destroy the formations. Right now, we are kind of at a time where we think that exploring further in the cave will damage the cave more than help it. We don't need to know more than 40 miles. We would like to, but if it's going to damage what we're exploring, what is the actual point of exploring it?
Do you think that mystery adds another layer to this national park of not knowing what's around the corner?
Yeah, I think it's really exciting. I would like nothing more than to go somewhere where no one has been before, to explore an area. A lot of people think you have to go to space or to the bottom of the ocean, but there's things just below our feet that no one has ever seen before, and that is really exciting.
It really is. And this cave has had a lot of long and interesting stories of cavers exploring it and finding new areas of the caverns, one of which includes helium balloons. Can you share that one?
Yeah, so there's a story, Spirit World. If you go into the big room and walk around it, you'll notice that there is a rope hanging right from the middle of the room. It goes up about 225 feet, and you can't just get a rope up 225 feet very easily. And in the 70s, so the best solution they could come up with was helium balloons attached to a piece of balsa wood that had a rope on it. And they moved those helium balloons up into a area that they saw that they thought might go in the ceiling. When I say might go, it's a term that's used as it goes, means it goes somewhere. And they attached it to something up there. They couldn't tell what they had attached it to, which is kind of terrifying in my opinion. And they had hooked it over there, so they tied the rope down at the bottom to a stalagmite, and they knew that that was solid down at the bottom, but they didn't know it was hooked to up top. And the story goes that there was 2 people who were going to go up there, and they were grabbing onto the rope, they were yanking on the rope. They climbed up about 10 feet and started bouncing on the rope. Now, the ranger who was up at the top of it, he's 10 feet up, his friend's down just below, they're bouncing on it, they're like, oh, it doesn't think we're going to go anywhere. The one at the bottom turns to the one at the top and says, well, you're already halfway up there, why don't you start climbing? So he climbed up to the top, realized that they were only on a stalagmite that's about that big, which is not the safest thing to be attached to. Now, those stalagmites, they're pretty solid, but if it's only that tall, there's a chance it'll go over the top of it if you're climbing. So he reattached it. His friend came up and they discovered Spirit World. And then above that, a few years later, they found Halloween Hall because they found it on Halloween. So they called it Halloween Hall.
I just thought they tried to come up with the most menacing names. Some of the room names are pretty menacing.
Yeah, the names of cavern parts, like rooms, are so weird. People name things for a tiny formation that's that big in a room that's the size of a Coliseum. They'll be like, this is the canary room because it's a tiny little canary in it. It's crazy.
One of the most enduring figures that you hear about when you visit here is Jim White, who first came here when he was only 16 years old. What's the story of Jim White?
So to really talk about Jim White, we have to go back another 14,000 years. So people have known about this cave for 14,000 years. There's evidence of people right around the entrance, and then there's a couple of drawings in the cave as well that are protected. So people have known about it forever. Everyone in the area knew about it as well. Jim White was really one of the first people to explore the cave. People had probably gone into the entrance a little bit and don't really want to go any further. And then he decided, with all his 16-year-old smarts, to go really far into the cave. Even he admits that he had people with him. One of the first people he took with him was a 14-year-old boy, so, very smart there. And they explored the cave together, and he brought more and more friends with him. Without Jim White, this would not be a national park, because we need people like Jim White to make it famous. If it wasn't famous, people would have just done what they did to a lot of the other caves in the area, taken all the formations and sold them. And there's a lot of caves in the area that were beautiful once and now have no formations left, which is pretty sad. But luckily, this one here was both inaccessible enough because there are parts that you need ropes or ladders. Now we have a nice paved trail to get down. And then also the formations are so huge that you could not walk off with them. The trail we're sitting on right now is actually the old Guano Road, which is one of the reasons that the became a park as well, because it made it more accessible. We at one point had a guano mining operation here. So if you go a little bit further down the trail, you'll notice some large concrete blocks. Those are put over holes that they had drilled to lower people in and pull guano out, and then they would transport the guano down this road for use in California as fertilizer.
Wow, that is fascinating. One thing with Jim White, too, is you mentioned earlier they would turn off the lights inside the caverns and people would sing Rock of Ages, which, by the way, the Park Service has done a tremendous job creating dramatic lighting. It's not like there's just lights everywhere down there. The lighting in there really amplifies the beauty that's in the caverns. But as folks can imagine, Jim White was likely going down with a torch or some sort of light, but it wasn't lit up how it is now. I've heard that there's remnants of rope that Jim White had left behind to keep him, able to get out of the cavern if there was no light.
You do see remnants of the ladders that he built. So if you go into the big room and go towards the jumping off place, you'll see this nice ladder with a bunch of broken rungs and stuff. So that was a Jim White ladder. It's been there for 100 years. He would build those, and then he'd carry a kerosene lantern and go down to look around. As for finding his way out, he explored very slowly. So over about a decade or two, he would go a little bit further into the cave. And same as if you're exploring the area around your house, you would notice a formation. You'd be like, I know what that formation is. I know how to get out now. And only going a little bit each day until he was comfortable with the area.
We've talked a lot about some human history, previous history of the Park Service and how it used to be managed and how folks would come down here and eat fried chicken. But the reality is the caverns are a very fragile and unique ecosystem. When folks explore there today, what are some things they can be mindful of, and how important is it that they really pack in and pack out everything that they bring with them, and don't leave anything behind?
It's really important. So before you go into the cave, you'll have a meeting with a ranger and they will tell you all the rules. And it sounds like a long list of rules. Don't do this, don't do that. But it's really to protect the cave. Some of the rules are don't bring any food down there. And you can bring food if it is medically necessary. Just talk to the ranger and they will be able to help you out. But if you bring food down there, even the tiniest crumb can destroy the ecosystem. We have stuff like cave crickets, we have bacteria down there. And when you add something to an environment that traditionally has absolutely nothing in it or very little in it, it's going to create a big problem. So imagine if you were walking down the street and all of a sudden you saw this gigantic thing of chocolate. It's going to destroy the chocolate industry because everyone's just going to be able to take the chocolate if they want. It's going to just mess everything up. Another rule we have is don't touch any of the formations. Now, part of that is to stop formations from breaking. Well, they're not incredibly fragile, and they are rocks. Even a small touch can destroy it in a way that is not necessarily thought of often. So you have oils on your hands, and that'll sometimes get on the formations and stop the growth of them. But also, it takes hundreds and hundreds of years to create a formation. So if you touch it, if you've ever seen a statue of a dog with its nose all shiny because so many people are rubbing the nose, because why wouldn't you rub the nose of a dog statue? It's the same idea. If you touch a formation, it's going to take a little bit off of that formation, and it's going to take a long time for that formation to heal, if it ever does, because formation may not be one of the ones that is growing in the cave.
Talk about geologic formations, but you also mentioned the Carlsbad cricket and also the horsehair worm that is in the caverns. They have a very unique relationship, the cricket and the worm. Can you talk about that?
Yes, people are always worried about monsters in the cave. There's none that will affect you. So the cave cricket, there's 3 different species of cave cricket. Some of them really live really deep in the cave, and they've adapted really well to the cave. They're blind down there. The ones that are closer to the surface aren't quite as blind, and they will often hop out of the cave and just spend the day in the cave, and they'll hop out at night to feed. But the horsehair worm will have larvae in cave pools, and the crickets, if they're thirsty, will drink from these cave pools, and sometimes they'll drink up the larvae. Now, normally you'd think, oh, nothing wants to be drunk by a cave cricket. This sounds terrible. But this larva is actually really happy because it'll start eating the cave cricket from the inside out. It'll leave most of the organs alone so the cave cricket can continue to live, but it's going to eat everything else in the cave cricket. And then once the larva has become a fully grown horsehair worm, it will send an enzyme to the cricket's brain, convincing the cricket that the cricket is so thirsty it wants to jump into the water. Normally, crickets are not going to end up in the water because they can't swim very well. So the cricket is going to jump into the water. The horsehair worm is going to burst out of it. If you've seen the movie Alien, really similar to that. And then that horsehair worm has one goal in life, and that is to mate. It's not going to eat anything else other than that cricket, but it's going to mate, lay some eggs, which hatch into larvae, start the whole process over again. You do not need to worry. If you drink some horsehair worm, your stomach acid will kill it. But please don't drink the water in the cave. It is very bad for you. It has some interesting bacteria in there.
So there's no monsters to us, but for the cave cricket, there's absolutely monsters
Definitely
in there for them. The pools of water that you just mentioned that are in the caverns, how long have those pools of water been there?
So they have an actually really interesting history. So while you go through the cave, you'll notice that it looks like those pools at one point were a lot higher. And that's true because at one point this was not a desert up here. And there was a temperate forest. There was a sort of savanna-like thing up here at one point. So a lot more water was going through, which meant those pools were a lot higher. When rangers started noticing that all the water in the pools was a lot lower, especially after they added the elevators and it did drop a little bit, they got worried. And so they started adding water, tap water from hoses into these pools to bring them back up to the level they thought it was at. They were trying to help solve a problem that they thought they had created. Turns out that adding tap water is not necessarily the best thing because the water in the cave has a specific mineral content that is created from that water trickling all the way down through small cracks into the cave. With adding the extra tap water It did destroy the cave a little bit, but once they realized that it was wrong of them to do that, they removed all of those hoses. So if people came here in the 70s and 80s, they may have noticed that the pools were a lot higher, and now you might notice that they're a lot lower. And they do vary a little bit depending on how much water is coming through, but not to the extent that we need to worry about it.
Like I had mentioned earlier, you still hear dropping of water coming from the ceiling down to the floor. Is that water leftover rainwater or meltwater?
Yeah, it's rainwater. We don't really have a lot of meltwater up here. We maybe get an inch of snow if we're really, really lucky, and it melts pretty much instantly. But yeah, so it's going to be rainwater that goes sleeping through. Again, it takes months to years for that water to get down there. So last 3 years we've been in a drought. It ended in the spring, luckily, but that is not really going to affect how much it drips down there because, again, months to years. So it's going to have to be a 30-year-long drought for that water to be affected down there.
Wow. So when you're hiking down there and you hear that drip, you're potentially hearing something that was on the surface where we're sitting now months to years ago?
Yeah. So if you are under the age of 30 or 35 and you're hiking down there and you get hit on the head with a drop of water, that drop of water might have landed on the surface before you were born, and then took a while to get down to you, and then you are the one thing stopping it from reaching the floor. But it is considered lucky. It's called being kissed by the cave. I like to think that it means the cave likes you. But yeah.
I didn't get kissed by the cave yesterday, so
you'll just have to go back.
Yeah. Just have to keep going until I get the kiss, I guess. But one of the most, I don't want to say sought after, but talked about, admired creatures that is here is the free-tailed Brazilian bat. And they've migrated at the time that we're recording this right now, but they have a bat cave here inside of Carlsbad Caverns. How important are they to the ecosystem here?
They're incredibly important. So we have 3 different species of bats that live in the cave. The cave myotis and the fringe myotis, they live in the deepest part of the cave. No one really sees them because they'll fly out later than the other ones, and there's only a few thousand of them. But the Brazilian free-tailed, last count, there was around 400,000 of them. That can change dramatically day to day. Sometimes we'll see 3 bats fly out of the cave. Sometimes we'll see so many that the night sky turns dark, and it's pretty impressive. But they eat a lot of insects, and without them, you wouldn't have the ecosystem that we have here. They even help us, because if you like any corn products, they tend to eat something called the cotton bollworm moth, and the caterpillar of that moth eats corn plants. And so a colony of bats like ours can save farmers millions of dollars a year, and also stop pesticides from entering the environment, which is something that we like because pesticides are bad for the environment. They also are an important food source for a lot of the animals around here. Everything from snakes to ringtails to raccoons to birds of prey are going to eat those bats. And then those bats will be part of the ecosystem both by eating food and by being eaten.
The Park Service has a program called Bat Flight where visitors have the opportunity to potentially see bats coming out of the cave like you had mentioned. What's that experience like?
If you get a good bat flight, it is one of those experiences that you're not going to forget. I have seen hundreds of them, and every single time it still takes my breath away. That said, some nights you're going to get a flight of 3 or 4 bats, because bats, they don't need to come out of the cave. They can stay in the cave for 3 days if they want. So if it's windy, if it's storming, if they just don't feel like it, they might stay in the cave. Another thing that people misunderstand about bats is they don't need to go back to the same cave every night. So there's 400 caves in the area. They can go to any one of those caves, which is why it's so important for visitors who are coming to that program to follow the rules and be quiet, not bring any electronic devices, or if they do bring them, make sure they're turned off. Now, medical devices that are electronic are allowed, because obviously that could go badly, but anything else is either leave it in your car or your hotel room or completely power it off. If those rules are followed, the bats are hopefully going to feel comfortable enough to come back the next morning or to exit the cave. And it's not only important that they stay at this cave because it's a protective cave, it's also important that they stay here because this is often a maternity colony, which means that they'll often have young here. And those young take about 7 weeks from birth to being able to fly by themselves. So they totally rely on their mother to bring them milk. That mother needs to eat about 100% of her body weight every day to produce 50% of her body weight in milk, which is a lot of milk, poor things. But If the visitors who come are too loud or bring electronic devices, often those mothers will be like, this is too scary and too dangerous. I'm not going to return to that cave. Or they'll try to have their young in a different cave, which is maybe not as well protected and can often be harmful for those young bats.
And why are caves the habitat of choice for bats?
Well, bats have echolocation. A lot of people think bats are blind, but they can actually see just as well as you and me, better in the dark and worse in the light because they are nocturnal. But they have that echolocation that allows them to see in complete darkness. No matter how good your night vision is in a cave, if the lights are turned off, it is completely black down there, and you're not going to be able to see anything. So the bats can use that echolocation, which is where they make a noise, and they listen to the echo, and they can tell where things are. Same as whales and dolphins, stuff like that, are able to do that. They can find their way out of the cave. Other animals can't find their way down there. We talked about some of the predators, ringtails, raccoons especially, will go into the cave and they'll wait near the entrance where it's still light enough for them to see. In bat cave, it's so dark that those ringtails can't get there and they're unable to eat those bats. It does not mean those bats don't have predators in the cave, though. There are beetles in the cave that like to eat flesh. So if a bat ends up on the ground in the cave, in bat cave, not where the humans are, don't worry, those beetles will often eat them.
Do you find evidence that, this is a major threat for the bats?
It's not a major threat for the bats. It is part of their ecosystem. Only the bats that end up on the ground, which are usually either really young or really old, will get eaten by them. And the beetles are unable to climb the wall. So if the bats are up on the ceiling where they roost, they'll be pretty safe.
So it's more like a natural circle of life.
Natural circle of life, yeah. Something's got to eat the bats if they're sick.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. And that's a perfect segue into white nose syndrome, which unfortunately is here in this cave. What is white nose syndrome and how does it affect the bats?
So white nose syndrome is a fungus. It's called white nose because the bats will get a white nose, white ears, and it kills the bats in two ways. One, it's going to start eating at them. So if you find a bat with a big hole in its wing, oftentimes that'll be white nose syndrome that's literally eating the bat. It'll also annoy the bat because being eaten will wake you up when you're hibernating. And the bat will wake up, be hungry, look for food, not be able to find anything, and eventually will starve to death or freeze to death. Luckily, our large population of bats are migrating bats, so they're not affected by white nose. What needs to happen for white nose to affect the bat is their body temperature needs to drop, which only happens while they're hibernating. So our cave and fringe myotis that do hibernate, they are affected by it, but the Brazilian free-tailed bats aren't affected by it. They can carry it, though. So if they're in a cave that has white nose syndrome, like our cave, they can travel to a different cave, to a different population of bats, and spread that disease.
For visitors that are maybe visiting a different cave and then coming to this one, what are ways that they can mitigate the risk of them maybe transmitting or taking this white nose syndrome from here and bringing it to a different cave?
Yeah, so we know that the fungus can last for at least 10 years on clothing, usually not on human skin, because hopefully you're taking a shower at some point. But the idea would be to wash your shoes with something like rubbing alcohol or a Clorox wipe, something like that, and then wash your clothing on hot and dry it on hot as well. If you're doing that, then you should be killing off those spores and you won't be transmitting it to other caves, which is always a good idea. If for some reason you're visiting two caves in one day, you do want to take a shower in between those two caves because it can end up on your hands or on your skin and transmit that way.
Bats have an interesting reputation across people throughout the world. Some absolutely adore and love bats. Some call them flying puppies. Others are absolutely terrified of bats. Has your opinion on bats always been positive? Has it changed since you visited the caverns?
I've always loved bats. I think that they're either cute or some bat species are so ugly that they're cute. And then they're also really helpful. Like you're told as a kid, they eat mosquitoes. Our bats don't eat mosquitoes. They're too small, like a little piece of popcorn. They're not going to eat that. But they do eat a lot of bugs. And being a person who's not a fan of bugs, I know I'm a park ranger, I still love everything. I really like bats, and coming here and seeing the bat flight has only made me learn more about them and love them more. My favorite bat, which we do have in the park but doesn't live in the cave, is a pallid bat. The reason they're my favorite bat is because they eat scorpions and desert centipedes, and of the bugs, desert centipedes are my least favorite.
Over scorpions?
Yeah, well, the desert centipedes have a very venomous bite as well.
Oh, yeah. Understood. As an Arizona native, not a huge fan of scorpions as well. You talk about echolocation, obviously extremely important for bats to be able to survive and work together. But it also brings up the point why we're sitting on this trail right now and not recording inside the caverns itself. When you visit inside the cavern, if you're solo or with visiting with a group, how important is it to speak with a soft tone?
It's really important. And part of it is to respect other visitors. This has been a place of worship, and it's an important part of many cultures. So you want to respect whoever's in the cave, however they're experiencing the cave. If you speak in a normal tone, it travels for a quarter mile. And so there's that element to it. But there's also the element of the bats. The bats live in the cave, and they live only about half a mile away from people. And oftentimes, if it's a large colony of bats, they've just had their young and there's all of a sudden another 200,000 bats in there, they're going to be a lot closer to people. So if you're speaking in a normal voice instead of a whisper, then that noise is going to disturb the bats. Again, they're going to decide that this is not an area that they want to live in, and they're not going to come to our cave, which is a protected spot for them, but also we don't get to see them, and we would like to see them because they're pretty cool.
With this park, there's time reservation. What is that process like, and what's the overall goal of the time reservation system?
So we have about 2.5 miles of self-guided tour in the cave. And at one point, however many people showed up would be allowed to go into the cave. However, that turned out to be an evacuation hazard. Just like buildings have fire codes, we have not necessarily what a fire code is because we don't have fires down there because it's all rock. But we do need to be able to evacuate people if something goes wrong. And things do go wrong. Sometimes we'll lose power up on the surface, which means all the lights will go out. Or there's always a chance of the road flooding, which means we need to evacuate people from the entire park before everyone gets trapped up here. And so we limit it to about 2,300 people in the cave per day. And the timed reservation system is really the only way to make that work. We allow about 300 people in per hour. We do have walk-up tickets for those people who are either unable to get a reservation or unable to access the internet, especially people who are traveling are often unable to get those reservations because they're traveling in the middle of nowhere, no cell phone service, no internet service. And so we have those to both keep people safe, but also if you have so many people in the cave, there's no way to stop people from brushing up against the formations. There's no way to effectively talk to everyone and make sure that they know all the rules to keep the cave safe. A lot of people, this is their first cave, and so they don't realize how different an environment it is from the surface.
When there are guided tours, how do you go about booking those guided tours, and what are the different experiences you can have?
So right now we only have the one guided tour. That's the King's Palace tour. We're offering that on a day-by-day basis. So usually if someone calls out sick, we don't have enough staff in order to offer those tours. But if everyone's in and we have enough staff on that day, we will often offer that tour. They're first come, first serve. So you'd have to show up. We only ever offer it for 12 or 24 people if we do offer it. And you have to be one of the first 12 or 24 people in line. Really hard to get. We are hoping to start up offering lower cave tours in January 2026. And those are an off-trail tour. That is a lot more physical, a lot more dangerous. You're going down ropes and ladders and 90 feet below the big room to wander around one of the layers that's down there. At one point you can look up into the big room. The rest of the time you're going to be in tunnels with some beautiful formations. But if you're going to do that tour, do make sure that you are physically fit, you're not scared of small spaces or heights, and that you are willing to climb up and down ladders.
Do you enjoy administering or leading those tours?
I did. When I was leading those tours, I really enjoyed it. You're wandering around with people in an area of the cave that you don't often get to go in. While this cave is impossible to ever not enjoy walking through, there's something special about getting to go to an area that not a lot of people get to go to.
For those that have concerns over, claustrophobia or being, well below the surface here, is taking the elevator down and experiencing the big room a good way to mitigate that with how large that room is?
Yeah, so the big room is the area that we send most people to. The big room is going to be the main attraction. Most of the time, the ceiling is going to be 100 to 200 feet above your head. It does not feel like you're in a cave. Now, if you're the sort of claustrophobic that doesn't like the idea of 750 feet of rock above your head, maybe don't go into the cave. Enjoy our surface stuff instead, or go down to Guadalupe Mountains National Park. But if you're someone who just doesn't like small spaces, 95% of the big room is going to be fine for you. There are a few areas where you have to walk through tunnels, but most of the time you can see the other end.
There's phones, emergency phones set up by the Park Service throughout the cave system. How can folks utilize those to get in touch with a ranger if needed?
Yeah, so those ones are going to be about every quarter of a mile or so. And you just lift the pin, open it, push the button. It'll automatically connect you to a ranger. And that ranger is going to be able to get you anything you need. So if you are just scared to be down there, they can get you a ranger to walk out with you. If you're unable to continue walking for whatever reason, they'll be able to get someone to stick you in a wheelchair and pull you out. If you need medical supplies, they'll be able to get someone for that. If you need a snack, they'll be able to bring you a snack. Now, please don't use them to bring you a snack, but if your blood sugar is low or something like that, they'll be able to help you out.
We talked about your role in search and rescue. How difficult is search and rescue for, a serious mission when time is of the essence with the cave system? How does communication work? How do the orders come up to you, and how do you execute?
Yeah, so one thing that happens in caves is it's going to take a lot longer to get to you and get you out than pretty much anywhere else. So if you got hurt on this trail here, we could pull a helicopter, stick you on the helicopter, fly you to El Paso or wherever. Going to be fine in about 3 hours. In a cave, it's going to take a lot longer. First of all, there's very few people who can actually pull people out of caves. And on the main trails, most of the time you're going to be okay because they are paved. It's fairly easy to get to you. But if you're on one of our off-trail tours, it can take a while because cave environments are so different from surface environments that it can be very difficult to both get to you safely and then get you out. Most of the time, on the surface, we can just carry you somewhere, stick you in a stretcher, carry you. In a cave, sometimes you'll be in a small crawl, we got to stick you on the stretcher, pull that stretcher through, and while we're crawling as well, and it's going to be a little bit more difficult. As for communication, in our cave, we are lucky enough to have radio lines. We also have lines that allow us to connect to the Wi-Fi, which is crazy. Only a few devices at a time, so we leave that for government devices that we can use to call for reinforcements if we need to. But in most caves, there's no communication. So you get a group of people and you tell them their mission, and they are going to have to adapt a whole lot. And without communication to the surface, sometimes for hours on end. We had a cave rescue in Lechuguilla in the 90s that took several weeks, and it took hundreds and hundreds of people just because the person wasn't too far from the entrance and they only had a broken leg, but because of the dangerousness and complexity of that cave, it took them forever to get someone out.
In search and rescue missions that aren't in caves, are in, above surface national parks, if there's, vegetation in the way or something in the way that's, blocking rescuers to get to that person, do they remove it? And is that prohibited? Obviously, in a cave environment, you can't just destroy the geologic formations to get to people.
So in the National Park Service, human life is placed above everything. So we would destroy a formation if it was the only way to get to you. But destroying the formations can be a little bit difficult. There is something called cave modification, where if you have a very small hole that someone in a stretcher can't fit through, they're going to blast that hole a little bit bigger. And it can destroy the cave. But again, human life is important. Now, there's very few people who can safely do that without bringing the cave down on someone's head. So getting that person to the cavern and then into the cave, which could be several miles and several hours, can often take a very long time. So again, that person might be stuck for a long time.
One of my favorite rocks after exploring was Iceberg Rock. It is one of the last rocks to crash from the ceiling. For folks who are maybe worried that could happen, what's the likelihood that something could come falling on top of you?
Very, very unlikely. Technically, it could happen because you are in a cave, but the time scale those things fall on are every 100,000 to 200,000 years. So it's just as likely as getting hit by a meteor. It could happen technically, but it's unlikely. We tend to get rock falls only if people are disobeying the rules. So we have had ones where people are like, let's see how strong I am. I'm going to push on this rock, and it comes down, sometimes knocking other rocks down as well. Don't do that, and you'll be fine.
An iceberg rock is a massive rock, but part of the reason why nothing is falling now is because the surface level is light enough to support the arch of the rooms and the formation, and that is built out. The arch is built out from the sulfuric acid, I assume?
Yeah, and from things falling. So that arch shape is really strong. In physics, there's no shape that's stronger than those arches. You may have seen Roman bridges that were built 2,000 years ago. They're still standing because they're in that arch shape. Once a cave reaches that arch shape, it's fairly safe. Nothing more is going to fall from the ceiling. Sometimes it'll be the sulfuric acid that carved that out. Sometimes it'll be the rainwater coming down, slowly carving the rocks enough until they fall.
I think that's so cool to think about. You talk about some of the strongest structures in the world that are man-made, but this, is Mother Nature, and
it's been here for 6 million, not 2,000.
Yeah. And not terribly far away, up in Utah, is Arches National Park with these incredible arches that are all over the park.
Cooler.
Yeah, I'm not gonna pick favorites here, but you have the right to fight for your side, of course. But it's incredible that we've learned from these natural, beautiful places like Arches National Park and like the caverns here to understand the physics of why is this roof not collapsing? And it's because of this arch position, and now we implement that into our structures in the world. Do you find beauty and awe in that when you're exploring your national parks and then realize some of those things in the real world?
I think it's really cool how humans have mimicked nature, sometimes without realizing it, but you'll see these formations, and sometimes people do it on purpose. If you've ever been on the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, that was built slightly after Walt Disney himself came to this cave. And he only spent about 40 minutes here, was like, this looks great, left, and then built the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. But you can tell that there's definitely elements that are from the cave.
With your time reservation, you have kind of a window. If you get a ticket from 1:15 to 2:15, you have to enter in that window. Do you have a certain time period that you have to be out by? And is there ways that you recommend folks just, take in the cavern and sit down and relax?
Yeah, so everyone needs to be out of the cave at 4:45. Doesn't matter what time you go into the cave. If you go in at 8:30 and want to spend the whole day there, you're welcome to do that. If you go in at 2:15 and you're like, hey, I want to spend the 2 hours I have in the cave, you're welcome to do that. But 4:45 is when we push everyone out of the cave. The reason for that is we need to turn off the lights so that the bats are comfortable down there in the summer, and then we want to go home in the winter. So we will turn those off. It's really up to you how you go into the cave. So the big room, again, is the main attraction. If you've got young kids, if you've got issues with your knees, your backs, your hips, we usually recommend you take the elevator down. It's going to be an hour and a half of walking. There's also a shortcut that's 45 minutes, and it's a little bit flatter than the hike down through the natural entrance. It goes up and down maybe 3 or 4 stories a few times. So if you're capable of doing that, definitely take the elevator down. If you want a bit of more of an adventure, you can hike down the natural entrance. It's another 1.25 miles. It takes an hour to hike down, but it is going to be on a 20% grade. It's going to go down about 800 feet and back up again 50. So really steep, and it can be very hard on the knees and the backs and the hips. That's where we have most of our rescues. And so if you're not certain you can do that, please don't attempt it. Just enjoy the big room, take the elevator up at the end. You are also welcome to hike out of the main corridor if you want. But again, you're going up 800 feet. So you're essentially climbing the Empire State Building. A lot of people do it. A lot of people enjoy it. But if it's not for you, it's not for you. And you can still get a lot out of the cave by just seeing the big room.
You mentioned earlier we're sitting on a trail right now recording this podcast. What can visitors find on the surface level, and why shouldn't the surface level of the cave be overlooked?
Yeah, so there's a lot of wildlife out here. You may be able to hear some of the birds in the background. We get a lot of really cool birds out here. We also have things like snakes. We have a lot of different types of snakes, including 3 different types of rattlesnakes. And then we have our Barbary sheep. We have our mule deer. We also have stuff like bears in the far back country. We don't see them out here. Javelina, cougars, stuff like that. You're most likely to encounter a snake if you hike the nature trail or one of our other trails, though they do sometimes end up in between the visitor center and the parking lot. They like to hang out there too. So if you're looking for some sort of wildlife, definitely hike around the surface. There's a lot of really unique things. And if you're really feeling adventurous, you're welcome to join us for one of our night hikes. That's often when a lot of the wildlife will come out, especially in the summer when it can be 110, 118 degrees on the surface. A lot of those animals will spend the day in their burrows and come out only at night when it cools down.
Oftentimes when you hike an environment like this, and there's vegetation all around us, you might be able to pick up some seeds in your shoes without knowing it. Is there a risk of maybe, vectoring vegetation down in the caves, or is there no chance that, seeds and life can survive in the form of vegetation?
It's funny you say that. We did have a plant that just kept growing. We'd pull it kept growing again, pull it, kept growing again. And most of the time, those seeds aren't going to cause an issue because the lights are off. But since we added lights in the cave, there's enough light for those to start growing. You'll also notice that some of the formations have green on them. That's algae that is growing. Most likely we tracked it in, but the air down there exchanges itself about every 36 hours, so it could have also blown in on the wind. And then when we add light, create this beautiful environment for this algae and these plants to grow, which is one of the reasons it's so important that we turn off the lights every night and that we monitor anything that we do bring into the cave.
I find the climate and the temperature of the cave to be fascinating. And it's the same year-round, correct?
Yeah, so the humidity will change a little bit. It'll be closer to 90% in the winter and 100% in the summer, but it's 56 degrees down there all the time. Now, that'll change. It'll feel like it changes. It won't actually change, but some parts of the cave will have a little bit more of a breeze than others, and that's the cave breathing. So naturally, the cave exchanges air every 36 hours. Same as any other convection, the hot air rises in the cave and the cold air rushes in, and it just switches around through that gigantic natural entrance that we have. And if the cave narrows in sections, there's still all that air that wants to go through it, so the narrower sections will have more wind flow. It's one way that you can tell what areas of a cave might have something behind it. So if you have a little tube, there's no air blowing. It's less likely that there's a big room behind it rather than if there's a lot of air blowing, which is why one of the sayings that cavers have is if it blows, it goes. So if there's a large room through a little tunnel and it's blowing, you can usually tell there's a large room back there.
That's fascinating. So do you recommend that visitors bring a light jacket with them to stay comfortable?
Yeah, usually a light jacket or a sweater. Really kind of depends on where you're from. Our friends who are from the warmer climates tend to think it's really cold in the cave. Anyone from Minnesota is going to be like, wow, it's so balmy in the cave. So really up to you.
It's interesting, too, because if you pull out your phone and take photos, you start to notice throughout your time in the cave that you get some condensation that starts to appear on your screen, or if you have a camera, it starts to appear on your lens, which is really interesting, too. It really is, this national park, out of the many that I've been fortunate to visit, this one feels like it almost doesn't belong on Earth, that it's hard to comprehend. After 3 years of working here, do you still get that same experience when you go there?
Yeah, especially when I go into areas of the cave that I haven't been in before. There's 40 miles of the cave, and sometimes you're lucky enough to go on a research trip or something to an area that you haven't been before. And you look at it and you're like, how in the world did this happen? And how am I lucky enough to be here?
Is there any, for researchers, overnight camping or sleeping in the caves?
Depending on what cave you go into, yes. So this cave here is 40 miles long. If you want to get to the very ends of it, you can either stay up for 24 hours or you can take a nap. Most people stay up for 24 hours because they're weird like that. But if you're going to be there for longer, you can take a nap. You bring a sleeping bag. You don't really need a tent because, you have a nice big roof above you. But you bring a sleeping bag or, a sweater or something, and you just take a nap. Sleeping in caves is absolutely wonderful.
Is it? I think I would imagine there's some listeners that have, the hair standing up on their arms at the thought of sleeping in a cave and not being able to see natural light or open up a window and see the outside. But you think it's interesting.
I do. So it's really dark and it's a beautiful temperature, and so it's just really comfortable. You wouldn't think rock's that comfortable, but it can be. But the people who are going to go down there for hours at a time, they have definitely they start small. So you start doing something like this, and then you're going to move up and up until you're comfortable enough. And if you're claustrophobic or uncomfortable with caves, you're not going to end up in that situation.
Is there anything else you want visitors to know about this amazing national park that's listening and either planning a trip here or, maybe need some convincing to come check out their first cave?
You should definitely come check out this cave. If this is your first cave, then it's going to ruin every other cave for you. So you might want to go to some other caves first. But other than that, I think every national park has something. So if you're not a cave person, that's okay. Go to some other national park. But you will be missing something if you don't come to this one.
I think that's such a beautiful saying that a lot of rangers say is that, our national parks have such a variety of things that there's bound to be a park that speaks to your heart. And so if caves aren't your thing, I would still recommend checking it out because it's absolutely incredible. But the really neat thing about our national parks is that there's something for everyone, and the parks range from all different shapes and sizes. And perfect example of that is, again, right around the corner, a giant El Capitan Reef sitting at Guadalupe Mountain. So if you like mountains, natural speed, great, but this is also fantastic. Thank you so much, Tiffany. It's been a blast getting to chat with you, and thanks so much for showcasing this incredible park.
Yeah.
I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Park Ranger Tiffany is incredible, and Carlsbad Caverns National Park is absolutely remarkable. So as always, if you like this type of content, it'd mean a whole lot to me if you followed or subscribed on whichever platform you're watching or listening on, as it really does help out our podcast. And until next time, safe travels.